The air was alive with music and laughter, creating the perfect atmosphere for what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My name is Rachel, and as I stood there in my beautiful white gown, I felt like a princess. Everything was magical, or so I thought. That feeling of joy was suddenly shattered in an instant. Rachel, dear, could you come here for a moment? My mother-in-law's voice pierced through the merriment. It was sharp, almost commanding. I smiled at my friends and excused myself, noticing how stiff my mother-in-law stood as I approached. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and the tension in her posture was clear. "What is it, Mrs. Paul?" I asked, trying my best to keep my voice calm and friendly. "It's about the way you look at me, Rachel," she said, her tone cold and full of accusation. "I know what contempt looks like, and you have it written all over your face. I am your husband's mother, and I deserve respect, not this disdain." Her words took me by surprise. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Mrs. Paul, I think you've misunderstood. I have nothing but respect for you," I replied, feeling a wave of confusion wash over me. "Respect? Huh," she scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "I see the way you roll your eyes at me, the sighs when I speak. You think I don't notice? You've even turned my son against me." Her voice was getting louder, and I could feel the eyes of nearby guests starting to turn toward us. I struggled to keep my composure. Before I could respond, Kyle, my husband, appeared by our side, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mom, what's going on here?" he asked, looking between the two of us. "Your wife, Kyle. She has been nothing but disrespectful to me," Mrs. Paul said, her voice trembling with emotion. "She's been looking down on me, and today, of all days, she's been the worst." Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched Kyle's arm. "Rachel, is this true?" Kyle asked, his face filled with a mix of disbelief and confusion. His gaze searched mine, waiting for an answer. "No, it's not true," I replied, my voice firm but calm. "I've done nothing to disrespect her." "She's lying, Kyle," Mrs. Paul cried, her grip on his arm tightening. "I'm your mother. Would I lie to you?" Tears now streamed down her face, adding to the drama unfolding in front of everyone. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down as Kyle's face changed from concern to anger. Without warning, his hand came up, and in one swift motion, he slapped me across the face. The sound echoed in the now silent room, and I stood frozen, my hand instinctively rising to my stinging cheek. The guests around us gasped in shock, but no one moved. I felt a mix of emotions: hurt, betrayal, anger, all swirling inside me. I wasn't sure what to say, or even how to react. "How could you?" I whispered, though I wasn't directing the question to anyone in particular. I wasn't just asking Kyle or his mother, but the entire universe, as if searching for an explanation for this nightmare I had walked into. Kyle, realizing what he had done, stammered, "Rachel, I didn't mean it. I was just..." But I didn't let him finish. "No," I said, my voice firm and steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "You've shown me exactly who you are." The pain of the slap was nothing compared to the pain of realizing the man I had just married was capable of this. I turned away from them both, knowing this moment had changed everything. I faced the guests, most of whom were still staring in stunned silence. "I'm sorry you had to witness this," I said, my voice calm though my heart raced. "Please, continue to enjoy the celebration. I need a moment alone." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the room. The music had stopped, and the laughter had died down. The world outside seemed so different now, the joy and excitement of the day a distant memory. I found a quiet corner away from the noise and chaos, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just moments ago, I had been filled with happiness, believing I was beginning a new chapter of my life. And now, I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down. My mother-in-law's accusations, Kyle's slap, the judgmental stares of the guests, it was all too much to bear. I needed time to think, to process everything. Could I really continue with this marriage after what had just happened? Could I trust Kyle again? The questions weighed heavily on my mind as I stood there, feeling lost and unsure of what to do next. But one thing was clear. My life had changed, and there was no going back. The perfect day I had imagined was gone, replaced by something darker and more painful. What I had to do now was figure out how to move forward, even if that meant doing it alone. I walked away from the crowd, and as soon as I did, I could hear the whispers start behind me. But I refused to let them affect me. I kept my head held high, knowing that this was not the end for me. Instead, it was the beginning of something new. My mind started racing, forming a plan. I wasn't going to let this humiliation go unanswered. I would find justice for what had happened today. Once I reached the privacy of the bridal suite, I allowed myself to finally feel the emotions I had been holding back. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't just tears of pain, they were also tears of determination. This moment wouldn't break me. I would not be a victim. I would rise above this and become a victor. My resolve was stronger than ever. After everything that had happened, I knew that I had to take action. I couldn't let them get away with it. The first step in my plan was to gather proof, undeniable evidence of the way Kyle and his mother had treated me. I decided to hire a private investigator to help me. Mr. Sean was known for being discreet and effective, just the person I needed for this delicate situation. "Mr. Sean, I need your help," I said when I called him. "My husband Kyle and his mother haven't exactly been kind to me. I need evidence of their behavior." "What kind of evidence are we looking for?" Mr. Sean asked, his voice calm and professional. "Anything that shows a pattern," I explained. "Emotional, financial, or even legal abuse, anything that can prove what they've been doing." "Understood," he replied. "I'll start with surveillance and background checks. I'll dig into their pasts, finances, everything. You'll get what you need." With Mr. Sean on my side, I felt like I was finally taking control. I began recording every interaction I had with Kyle and his mother. Every phone call, every conversation, I needed all the evidence I could gather. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. In the midst of all this chaos, my best friend Maria became my biggest source of comfort and support. She had been there for me through everything. "Maria, I don't know how I would get through this without you," I confessed one day when things felt especially overwhelming. "You don't have to go through this alone," she reassured me. "I'm here for you always." "So, what's the plan?" "I'm collecting evidence," I said, explaining my plan to her. "Mr. Sean is helping too. I want to expose Kyle and his mother for who they really are." Maria looked at me with concern. "Be careful, Rachel," she warned. "They're not going to see this coming, and when they do, they'll be furious." "I know," I nodded. "But I can't let them get away with this." Over the next few weeks, the evidence I collected started to build up. It was clear from the phone calls that Kyle's tone was often aggressive and demeaning. The financial records Mr. Sean uncovered revealed just how much control Kyle's mother had over his assets. Some of the transactions we found were questionable, hinting at possible fraud. The more we uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. One evening, Maria and I sat down together to review all the findings. As we combed through the documents, something jumped out at us. "Look at this, Maria," I said, pointing to a series of bank statements. "They're moving large sums of money, but where is it all going?" "And these emails," Maria added, scanning through them. "It sounds like they're planning something, but we don't know what yet." "We need to connect the dots," I said, feeling the weight of everything we were uncovering. "This isn't just about emotional abuse anymore. There's a whole web of lies and manipulation going on." Maria's eyes widened as she stared at the evidence in front of us. "Rachel, we're on to something big here," she said, her voice filled with both excitement and fear. The more I delved into the evidence, the clearer it became that Kyle and his mother were involved in more than just toxic behavior. This went beyond their mistreatment of me. They were hiding something much bigger, something possibly illegal. I could feel the truth slowly unraveling, and I was determined to see this through to the end. As the days passed, I became more focused on my goal. I wasn't just collecting evidence for myself anymore. I was uncovering a story of deceit and manipulation that needed to be exposed. Kyle and his mother had spent years weaving this web of lies, but now I had the power to tear it all apart. There was still much to be done, but I was no longer the helpless bride they had tried to humiliate. I was stronger than they had ever realized, and soon, the truth would come to light. This wasn't just about getting justice for myself, it was about making sure they faced the consequences of their actions. I wasn't sure how things would end, but one thing was clear. I was ready to fight, and I wasn't going to back down. The whispers of that day were nothing compared to the roar of truth that was about to come crashing down on them. I would no longer be a victim of their games. I would be the one in control. I started to piece it all together. Looking over the documents again, I realized something shocking. "I think they're embezzling funds from Kyle's company," I said to Maria, my voice barely above a whisper. "These documents, they're incriminating." Maria looked at me, her face serious. "Rachel, this is really serious. You need to be careful. They won't take kindly to being exposed." "I know," I said, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "But I can't back down, not now. There's too much at stake." The evidence wasn't just about how cruel they had been to me. It was more than that, it pointed to serious criminal activity. I had everything I needed to make a move, and it was time to come up with a plan to bring them to justice. It was also time to take back control of my life. "Maria," I said, feeling the weight of my decision, "I'm going to expose them publicly." Maria hesitated for a moment, knowing the risk involved. "Rachel, that's risky. You're playing with fire. But if anyone can do it, it's you." With Maria by my side and the evidence in my hands, I felt stronger than I had in a long time. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. This was about justice, about making sure Kyle and his mother faced the consequences of what they had done. It was time to show the world who they truly were. The next step was clear. I had to bring everything out into the open. I decided to organize an event, pretending it was for a big announcement. I invited friends, family, and even a few media contacts, people who would help get the story out. The venue was lavish, with an atmosphere full of excitement and curiosity. Everyone was eager to hear the news. As I stood at the front of the room, I took a deep breath. The time had come. "Thank you all for coming," I began, keeping my voice steady and my expression calm. Kyle and his mother, Mrs. Paul, stood beside me, smiling. They had no idea what was about to happen. "Rachel, darling, we're so proud of you," Kyle said, his voice sweet but insincere. "Whatever the announcement is, we support you." His words felt like poison, but I stayed composed. "I've gathered you all here to share some important truths," I said, pausing to gauge the room's reaction. "Truths about my marriage and about the Paul family." Mrs. Paul's smile faltered. "Truths?" she repeated, her voice shaky with a mix of confusion and fear. "Rachel, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the abuse, the lies, and the illegal activities that have been going on behind the scenes," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. The room went silent. The tension was thick, and all eyes were on me. "Rachel, have you lost your mind?" Kyle's face turned red, his anger barely under control. "Quite the opposite, Kyle," I said calmly. "I've never been more sane, and I've never been more sure of what I need to do." I gestured to the screen behind me. "Exhibit A," I announced as a video started playing. It was a recording of one of our many heated, abusive conversations. The crowd gasped as they heard Kyle's voice, full of anger and cruelty. The murmurs grew louder, and I saw Mrs. Paul's face go pale. Her hands started to tremble. "This is just the beginning," I said, holding up a folder filled with documents. "These papers show financial irregularities, embezzlement, fraud. It's all here." "You can't do this, Rachel," Kyle shouted, his voice a mix of pleading and threat. "You're ruining everything." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not ruining anything, Kyle. I'm exposing the truth. A truth that everyone deserves to see." The media personnel who had been invited started clicking their cameras, capturing every moment of this dramatic revelation. There was no turning back now. This was it. "Rachel, please." Mrs. Paul's voice was barely a whisper, her confidence shattered. "Let's talk about this privately. There's no need for this public display." I shook my head. "No, Mrs. Paul. No more private discussions. The time for hiding is over." As I continued to show more evidence, The reactions in the room varied. Some guests looked shocked, others shook their heads in disbelief. There were whispers and murmurs among the crowd, but no one could deny what they were seeing. Kyle and Mrs. Paul stood frozen, their masks of respectability slipping away, revealing the truth beneath. "This is my story," I said, addressing the room. "A story of surviving abuse and standing up against injustice. I refuse to be a victim any longer." The event ended in a flurry of activity. Reporters swarmed around me, asking questions, while many guests approached to offer words of support and admiration. I had done it. I had exposed the truth, standing strong and maintaining my composure through it all. It was a moment of triumph, a moment where I finally reclaimed my power and my voice. But this wasn't the end. The courtroom was the next step, the place where everything would come to a final conclusion. As I sat in that stark, imposing room, a mix of nervousness and determination washed over me. My lawyer sat beside me, ready to fight for justice. This was the final act of my journey, and I was ready to see it through to the very end. I couldn't help but notice how uneasy Kyle and Mrs. Paul looked across the courtroom. Their once confident faces were now filled with anxiety as the trial began. "Your Honor, we are here to present the case against Kyle and Mrs. Paul," my lawyer said, his voice steady and strong. "This isn't just about a divorce. It's about years of emotional and financial abuse that Rachel has endured." Kyle leaned toward me from across the room, whispering, "Rachel, you can't win this. You're going too far." I met his gaze, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about winning, Kyle. It's about justice. It's about showing everyone who you truly are." The trial moved forward, and my lawyer presented the evidence with precision. There were the recordings of Kyle's cruel words, the financial documents revealing their manipulation, and all the proof that painted a clear picture of the painful life I had lived. Each piece of evidence was undeniable. "Your Honor, as you can see, the evidence is overwhelming," my lawyer continued. "We are not only seeking a divorce, but also legal actions for the wrongs that have been committed against my client." Mrs. Paul, clearly rattled, tried to defend herself. "Your Honor, this is all just a misunderstanding. Rachel is exaggerating." Her voice was weak, even to her own ears. I looked straight at her, my words steady and direct. "Exaggerating? The evidence speaks for itself. You can't hide from the truth anymore." The judge listened carefully, reviewing all the evidence and testimonies presented. After what felt like an eternity, she finally made her ruling. "In light of the overwhelming evidence, I grant the divorce and order legal actions against both Kyle and Mrs. Paul for their conduct." As the gavel struck, a wave of relief and vindication washed over me. It was over. I had stood up to them, fought for justice, and emerged victorious. The long, painful chapter of my life was finally closed. With the legal battles behind me, I knew it was time to start a new chapter, one focused on healing and rebuilding. I found a small, peaceful home in the countryside, a world away from the chaos and drama of my past. The quiet and beauty of the place were just what I needed. Sitting on the porch of my new home, with a warm cup of tea in my hands, I gazed at the serene view before me. The trees gently swayed in the breeze, birds chirped in the distance, and the sun shone softly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was a fresh start, a life free from lies, manipulation, and pain. My journey had been difficult, but it had been worth it. I hadn't just survived. I had triumphed. I had found my inner strength, reclaimed my voice, and now I was free. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, I smiled to myself. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape a future filled with hope, healing, and happiness. This was my story of triumph, the story of a woman who refused to be silenced. I had stood tall against all odds, and now I was living a life of freedom and peace. My journey had reached its conclusion, but I knew it was just the beginning of a brighter, better life. The story of Rachel's journey has come to an end. Do you think her decision to expose and legally confront her husband and his mother was the right choice? Could she have handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful